As you can see by the chalkboards behind me, our Lenten theme this year takes us back to school. We have some lessons to learn about virtuous living. 2 weeks ago, you were introduced to the field of moral theology, and we were all challenged to think about the virtuous life as a life in pursuit of happiness. I contend, along with theologians and philosophers across millennia, that true happiness, freedom, and what Jesus called blessedness are found by practicing essential virtues. On these boards, you see 7 such virtues displayed, 4 of which are named as cardinal virtues. They're fortitude, prudence, justice, and temperance, and 3 that we call the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love. So today we are tackling justice and temperance. About justice. The virtue of justice is about giving everyone his or her due. Some would define it as finding the middle between selfishness and selflessness, between having more and having less than one's fair share. So pursuing justice for myself and my family may mean making sure that we're treated fairly, not being deprived of what is due to us, but also not expecting or demanding more than our fair share. Pursuing justice for my neighbors is applying the same fervor that I would demonstrate in securing my own fair share to securing theirs. And pursuing justice in my relationship with God is giving God what is due to God, which of course includes my worship and obedience. In classic Christian thought, acting justly toward God means practicing the virtue of religion. Practicing means not just believing something, but actually doing it. Weekly attendance at worship is a spiritual discipline of practicing the sub-virtue of religion, as are home religious practices of praying, offering thanks for meals, and reading scripture on my own, as well as many other practices. Practicing the moral virtue of religion is a sub-virtue of the cardinal virtue of justice, living a life where everyone gets what is due to them, including God. So the phrase, well, I don't go to church anymore because I don't get anything out of it, well, that doesn't make any sense in the framework of moral theology, which places the practice of religion in the quadrant of the moral compass, which covers justice. Justice means moderating our lives between the poles of selfishness and selflessness, so that not only I get what I am due, but so does my neighbor, and so does God. Justice at work means treating my employer justly by working hard for the paycheck that I receive, being honest and thrifty, not seeking to take personal advantages from my employer, which are not mine to presume. As an employer, it means treating all those I supervise with dignity, compassion, and respect, paying a fair wage that demonstrates all those concerns, and making the workplace a safe and a positive place for them as much as I am able. Justice at home means treating all my family members with compassion, dignity, and respect. It requires honoring our relationships by pulling my weight on household chores, demonstrating gratitude for what others in the family do, and being sensitive to new needs within our household as they arise. In the biblical story of Cain and Abel, the gravest of injustices happens when the sacred bonds of the first family are unable to give justice to one another. Cain, who is a farmer, kills his brother Abel, who is a hunter. Unable to moderate the passions of jealousy, Cain is enraged that it seems God favors Abel and his way of gathering food from the land. Immediately after the murder, God asks Cain, "Where's your brother?" And Cain responds, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The unspoken answer to God's direct question reverberates across all human history. Am I my brother's keeper? What does the Lord require of you? Well, that's another great question. The prophet Micah has God respond to seek justice and do it, to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. The other virtue that we examine today is temperance. Temperance is that virtue which helps us to master our own unruly will and to moderate our passions. It's the moral virtue that regulates our attraction to pleasures and provides balance in our use of created goods. Temperance invites us to ask ourselves other questions. What do I need to say no to right now? What do I need to say yes to right now? What preoccupations have I allowed to enslave me? Well, if you're anything like me, you find it very easy to say yes. Easy to say yes to ice cream and procrastination and second helpings and third helpings and binge watching my favorite TV. It's much harder to say yes to starting a difficult project I've been dreading, making a difficult phone call that might be unpleasant, committing to healthier physical activities. When it comes to saying no, maybe right now you need to say no to a distraction that's interfering with your real work, or a temptation that jeopardizes a relationship you value, or an alluring pursuit that's not worthy of the person you aspire to be. Our difficulties in saying an enthusiastic yes or responding with a firm no, as circumstances require of us morally, may be related to a kind of slavery we are allowing to oppress us. The moral virtue of temperance is all about saying an emphatic no to slavery and an emphatic yes to true freedom. The Apostle Paul warns against us becoming slaves to sin. Some people incorrectly assume that Paul was recommending a life that is short on pleasure and long on suffering, and that the church advocates such a life. But that's not so. When we seek to grow in the virtue of temperance, we may intentionally challenge our spiritual muscles by denying ourselves for a time some specific pleasure, but it's not for the purpose of self-punishment. During Lent, when many of us give up sweets or fatty foods or television or Facebook, we're acknowledging that some behaviors that we regularly have become addictive, and that those addictions do not lead to human flourishing or our personal happiness. Pope Benedict XVI wrote, "The ultimate goal of fasting is to help each one of us make a complete gift of ourselves to God. Fasting is a positive practice to help us grow in the virtue of temperance. Temperance looks to the good, the pleasurable, the inviting things we enjoy in life, and helps us to embrace them with moderation. Whether pleasures in sexual expression, or in eating, or shopping, or playing games, or watching television, pleasures remain a good for both us and those we love when we are able to pursue them with prudence and with wisdom, moderating ourselves. Likewise, our emotions are good, but passions which run amok without moderation are often deeply harmful to us and our relationships at work, at home, in society. Like courage and wisdom, justice and temperance go hand in hand. To truly live justly, we must temper our passions and our desires so that we may honestly seek fairness in giving everyone what they are due. Justice and temperance, two more virtues for us to pursue and to practice."
Our scripture reading today comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 16 and following. If I proclaim the gospel, this gives me no ground for boasting, for an obligation is laid on me, and woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am entrusted with a commission. What then is my reward? Just this, that in my proclamation I may make the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. For though I am free with respect to all, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so that I might win those outside the law. To the weak, I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, so that I may share in its blessings. Do you not know that in the race the runners all compete, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win it. Athletes exercise self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable one. So I do not run aimlessly, nor do I box as though beating the air. But I punish my body and enslave it, so that, after proclaiming to others, I myself should not be disqualified.
Have you ever heard the phrase, "I'd rather see a sermon than hear one"? Well, I've heard that all my life. But just this week, I heard the entire poem from which it comes. The poet is Edgar A. Guest, who was Poet Laureate of Michigan in the early 20th century. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather one should walk with me than merely tell the way. The eye's a better pupil and more willing than the ear. Fine counsel is confusing, but examples always clear. And the best of all the preachers are the ones who live their creeds, for to see good put in action is what everybody needs. I soon can learn to do it if you'll let me see it done. I can watch your hands in action, but your tongue too fast may run. And the lecture you deliver may be wise and very true, but I'd rather get my lessons by observing what you do. For I might misunderstand you and the high advice you give, but there's no misunderstanding how you act and how you live. When I see a deed of kindness, I am eager to be kind. When a weaker brother stumbles and a strong man stays behind just to see if he can help him, then the wish grows strong in me to become as big and thoughtful as I know that friend to be. And all travelers can witness that the best of guides today is not the one who tells them, but the one who shows the way. One good man teaches many, men believe what they behold. One deed of kindness notice is what worth 40 that are told. Who stands with men of honor learns to hold his honor dear, for right living speaks a language which to everyone is clear. Though an able speaker charms me with his eloquence, I say I'd rather see a sermon than to hear one any day. Well, last week, my sermon was titled Those Fabled Virtues, as I enjoyed seeing the sermon in ancient stories which communicate enduring truths. The tortoise and the hare, the grasshopper and the ants, and Heracles encounters strife. Fables are one way of seeing a sermon. Another way of seeing a sermon is, as the poem suggests, by watching a friend, a family member, or someone else we know living their life well. I hope you have been blessed, as I know I have been, with such wonderful examples of the virtues we're exploring this Lent among those closest to you. Yet another way of seeing a sermon is to read excellent literature, which is rife with examples of the classic virtues and their corresponding vices. By seeing a life unfold in a novel or learning about a historical person through their biography, we may well be reading a sermon. What novels have you read that are sermons on justice, wisdom, temperance, and prudence? Today, I want to share with you the true life story of a person who I think lays out an example of a struggle between temperance and justice. Since fine counsel may confuse, as the poet says, I'll leave the lectures and high advice for later. And I just want to tell you a story about William today, and to ask you to think about his life, how it unfolded as he sought to give everyone what was due, to himself and to his family, as well as to others and to God. William was born into poverty in 1862. Named after his father, he carried on the name of German immigrants, first known as the Sonntags, who had originally settled in Pennsylvania but traveled west seeking work. The elder William was a bricklayer who worked his way as far as Iowa. In 1862, William Sr. joined the Iowa 23rd Volunteer Infantry and died of pneumonia in a Missouri Army camp just 5 weeks after the birth of William Jr. The infant William and his older siblings were taken by their mother to live with her parents for a time. His mother eventually remarried, but her second husband soon deserted the family. Unable to feed all her children, at age 10, young Billy and his older brother were sent by their mother to the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans' Home. There he received a decent primary education, gained some order in his life, developed healthy habits, and realized that he was a very good athlete. By age 14, William was fending for himself, doing farm chores and caring for some ponies which belonged to a former Iowa lieutenant governor, John Scott. The Scott family provided Billy with a good home and the opportunity to attend high school. Although he didn't receive his diploma, by 1880 he was better educated than many of his contemporaries. Billy left high school because, attracted by his athleticism, the fire brigade team of Marshalltown, Iowa, had recruited him. He worked odd jobs, competed in fire brigade tournaments, and played for the town baseball team. In 1883, the Chicago White Stockings recruited and signed Billy to their defending National League championship team. He remained a part-time player for 4 seasons. His greatest asset was his speed, both rounding bases and in the outfield. And in 1885, the White Stockings arranged a race between Billy and Arlie Latham, the fastest runner in the American Association. Billy won the 100-yard dash by 10 feet. His personality, demeanor, and athleticism made him popular with fans and his teammates. From Chicago, Billy went to play for the Pittsburgh Alleghenies and then the Philadelphia Phillies, and in each city he was very popular as an exciting fielder and one of the fastest base runners in the game. But while his speed was impressive, his batting average was about median for the time. In 1891, he asked to be released from his contract. And though he remained an enthusiast in the world of baseball for his entire life, it's not the career for which he is remembered. Something had happened to Billy on a Sunday afternoon back in Chicago, out on the town with his teammates. They stopped to listen to a gospel preaching team at a church mission. Drawn in by the familiar hymns that he could hear his mother's voice singing in his head, he stayed and became a regular worshiper. He became friends with a society matron who worked there and eventually joined her very fashionable Presbyterian church near the ballpark. Many of you will already have realized by now that those German immigrants named Sonntag anglicized their name to Sunday early on, and Billy the ball player is none other than Billy Sunday, the Evangelist. Through most of his professional baseball career, Billy Sunday was a regular speaker at churches and YMCAs everywhere he went. Eager to speak on the temperance circuit, he was a strong advocate for conservative morality and spoke against drinking, playing cards, dancing, attending theater, and reading novels. He was in favor of picnics and baseball, as long as baseball wasn't played on Sunday. The fashionable Presbyterian church by the ballpark and the friendly society matron from the mission made it possible for Billy to move into a whole new circle of acquaintances. He was introduced to the daughter of one of Chicago's wealthiest dairymen. And though immediately smitten with one another, it took time for other obligations to clear out of the way, and still more time for Nell Thompson to sway her father into believing that a ball player named Billy Sunday was a suitable match. 5 years after they first met, Billy Sunday turned down a baseball contract for $3,500 a year to accept a position with the Chicago YMCA at $83 a month. For the next 3 years, he visited the sick, prayed with the troubled, counseled the suicidal, and visited saloons, inviting their patrons to his evangelistic meetings. Later, Billy became the full-time assistant to one of the country's best-known evangelists. Using skills he learned on the road as a baseball player and manager, he did the advance work for Wilbur Chapman's preaching events, taking care of everything, from the financial details to erecting the tents. Chapman encouraged Billy's theological development and reinforced his commitment to very conservative Christianity. When Chapman suddenly decided to return to an established pastorate, Billy Sunday struck out on his own. Always a crowd pleaser, he took advantage of his reputation in baseball and organized local baseball teams into a scheduled game. He would arrive in his professional ball uniform and play on both sides, then follow with an evangelistic meeting. Though baseball was his usual way of generating publicity, he also once hired a circus giant to serve as the usher at the meeting, and he quickly became well known for his preaching style, which you could say was fiery. His sermons were simple, colloquial, easy to understand, but above all else, they were engaging. Billy rarely stayed in the pulpit. In fact, he often hopped up on top of it, lunging toward the crowd to make his point. He gyrated while making a point during a sexual sermon, ran from one end of the preaching platform to the other, dove across the stage pretending to slide into home plate. He was even known to smash chairs to emphasize his points. And when preaching against sexual immorality, he could become so raw and graphic that religious reporters of the time wrote that every time that particular sermon was preached, quote, 2 to 12 men fainted and had to be carried out, end quote. I just found that detail oddly specific. Religious and social leaders were often highly critical of him, but the audience loved it. Large crowds and an efficient organization headed by his wife, Nell, meant that the former resident of an orphan home who walked away from a significant baseball contract to work for $83 a month was soon bringing in enormous offerings to support his personal enterprise. In 1913, he was effectively making $870 a day at a time when the average gainfully employed worker made much less than that per year. Billy and Nell made significant donations to the mission where he was first converted and gave large sums of money to war charities. Nevertheless, between 1908 and 1920, the Sundays earned over $1 million. During that same time period, the average worker in the U.S. earned less than $14,000. Billy Sunday was welcomed into the circle of political, social, and economic elites. He dined with President Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and counted both John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Herbert Hoover as his friends. On Los Angeles campaigns, he visited with Hollywood stars. He loved expensive clothing, jewelry, and shoes, and all manner of fine things. The Sunday's children were raised almost exclusively by their nanny, as Nell had joined Billy Sunday on the road to run the enterprise. And though the family fortune, which was quite significant by the time he died, was left exclusively to his children, I wonder if he ever asked if it had been worth it. In his final years, he must have wrestled with the parents' most difficult questions. Had he chosen the right path? Had he given everyone what they were due? The last decade of Billy Sunday's life was marked by tragedy and grief. The nanny with whom he and Nell had left their children to be raised died. His 3 sons, now grown, were notorious for engaging in all the vices their father spent his lifetime preaching against. He was busy paying blackmail in those last years to several women to keep scandals about his sons quiet. His oldest son, whom he had rescued from financial ruin, committed suicide, and the one child which Nell had actually raised herself, their daughter, died of multiple sclerosis. It was a sad and tragic time. Billy Sunday never stopped accepting preaching engagements. Whether his drive came from an honest passion for communicating the gospel or an addiction to fawning crowds, who among us can ever really know? His final sermon was given just 1 week before his death. Billy Sunday's influence on American Christianity is undeniable. He was the first preacher to widely use radio to communicate with audiences, the forerunner to every televangelist since. His political, religious, and social conservatism set a template for evangelists and preachers who followed afterward, also building successful financial enterprises for themselves, while cozying right up to the wealthy and influential and powerful in politics and business, providing a cover of morality by association to many people of deep privilege who, like his own children, did not practice the virtues he preached. Sunday's record on social issues, it's complicated. Having climbed out of deep poverty to extreme wealth in his own lifetime, he remained forever sympathetic to those stuck in a system stacked against them. He preached against capitalists whose, quote, private lives are good, but whose public lives are very bad, as well as those who would not pick the pockets of one man with the fingers of their hand, but would without hesitation pick the pockets of 80 million people with the fingers of their monopoly or commercial advantage. On the issue of race, many say that he sincerely tried to bridge the gulf during the zenith of Jim Crow, but on at least 2 occasions in the 1920s, he received contributions from the Ku Klux Klan. And when his preaching was once interrupted by hooded Klansmen, he said, quote, "I do not believe that any organization that marches behind the cross of Christ and the American flag can be anything but a power for good." Always playing to the crowd, that wasn't Sunday's only good people on both sides moment. Sunday's creed was individualism, competitiveness, personal discipline, and opposition to government regulation. He opposed the teaching of evolution in schools, and he decried loose morals. A century later, his business model, engagement tactics, and talking points reverberate in current manifestations of religious nationalism and in the fervor of the culture wars. Here endeth the sermon. Do you see it? I've always believed that the best sermons are the ones that leave me wondering, the ones that allow me to walk away smug and self-satisfied, and that wraps it all up. Well, they've probably not hit the mark. It seems that Jesus' teaching always stimulated the disciples to ask one another and him lots of questions. So I hope you are asking questions now. Where did you see fortitude and wisdom? Where temperance and justice? Where did the cardinal virtues in his life put pressure on one another? Where did the pursuit of virtue bring true happiness? And to whom?
On the night when he was betrayed, Jesus, after having blessed the bread, took it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "This is my body given for you. Remember me." And in like manner he poured out the cup. He said, "This is a new covenant in my blood. As often as you drink this, remember me." We, in partaking of the bread and the cup, remember the Lord's death until he comes.